All right, you ready for this interview?
I am.
Okay, so first of all, I'm sure the name Stud Count comes up. Whose idea was it? Why? And how did that happen?
That would be me. I guess one. I mean, I just really try to come up with band names that aren't taken and are also okay, at least if not good. And I've really lucked out with the bands I'm doing now because no one had come up with it, which kind of shocked me. When I was coming up, getting into punk and hardcore in the early 2000s, I came up at a time, especially where I was living, which was like less than an hour from New York City. There was a something of a cred check about the amount of spikes on your jacket, and like the thing is I was like 12, 13, 14 getting into this stuff, and so that didn't strike me as incredibly weird that people cared. That struck me as like, oh, this is a thing I can belong to and get excited about. And I haven't had my stud count cred checked in like 15 plus years at least. It's hard to tell if they were even ever being serious, but I came up with it for that reason and sort of the joke that this is some of the poppiest music I've ever written in my life. Yeah.
Nice. A couple of songs I played today. I played a bunch of your stuff on my phone about a week ago, but today I played the two videos, and those riffs and hooks are like really strong. So
Thanks, man.
you're
Appreciate that.
welcome. Good job. Well, you referenced Wipers, Garbage, and Husker Du as influences. Also, what were some of the summer punk albums that meant a lot to you in the past, and why?
Well, I mean, I would say that like my first summer punk record was I was like 9 years old and it was a Blink 182 record. So I got a bootleg of Enema of the State at 9. And so while I denied Blink 182 getting me into punk for a handful of years after that, I mean, without that pipeline, I would have never found out who the Clash or the Ramones were. So like that first era of being like 9, 10, 11 and getting into like some 41 and Blink 182 and the sort of now looked down upon, pop punk bands at the time. I mean, no FX even, I don't, those were summer records for me. Those were records that, Pennywise even. And, I mean, as I got older a little bit, I still held on to, I would say like I was 13 when I got into the Ramones and the Clash, and then those became my summer records. I mean, for me to this day, pretty much everything on Rocket to Russia counts as a summer soundtrack song for me. So I guess that's really it. Ironically, I think my cousin gave me an MXPX record when I was 10, slowly going the way of the Buffalo, which was also a summer record for me.
Yeah, good album.
Great one.
Tell us about the live music scene that's around you in Philadelphia.
Well, so I lived in Philadelphia for 5 years, but I had been in and out of it my entire life. I'm from, like I said, I'm from a suburb of New York City, and my brother was raised to a certain age in Philadelphia. My parents were in and out of there about 20 years. So going down to Philadelphia was a thing I was doing from the time I was young. But my wife and I actually relocated to Johnson City, Tennessee, a handful of months ago. So I can tell you a little bit about Philly, but I guess it's possible things have changed in the last 6 to 8 months. Um, so don't quote me on it if for some reason something isn't still true. But when I was there, I was really involved in specifically hardcore and hardcore punk. There's always a lot going on. It's a major city. Um, it seems pretty divided in and of itself. You have your punk end of things for hardcore, at least. That's your largely populated either by people who came there for college and never left, or you know art students who are there for a short time. And musically, that's a little bit more where I land. And then you get your sort of heavier side of hardcore and hardcore punk, which is run by the guys who do this as hardcore. And I worked for the Fest for a few of those years, and I typically had a great relationship with those guys. And that part of the music scene is really its own animal, and everything else is just sort of falls under the everything else category. You have your main guys that book hardcore TM. You have your main people who book your basements and your punk stuff. And as those people have developed, you have your hardcore adjacency that those people book too. So bands like Sheer Mag, which you haven't heard, I would recommend Sheer Mag. They play like 70s like garage sale. I found a vinyl rock, for fans of Janis Joplin and Thin Lizzy, basically.
Wow.
And yeah, and so we're into. I don't know how involved you were in coastal music at all in between the years of like 98 and 2005, but we're really just having a repeat of that whole era. I mean, there are bands coming out of New York, Long Island hardcore right now that sound like Jimmy Eat World. So that's really, it's not no different in Philly than say New York or in Boston.
Right.
Yeah.
You recently relocated to Tennessee, you said. What's the scene like around you now?
Not really a scene around me right now.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something to it. There are definitely people who like punk in the city. I'm a server at a restaurant, and like I meet most of the people that way. Some guy with a off with their head shirt comes in. He's probably 40 something and has 2 kids or something like that, and we get along. And there's something of like nobody cares about smaller cities like this. So the music scene, it might be important to itself, and that's the best you can really hope for. But from what I understand, I mean, it wasn't always like this, man. Like, apparently, like, the guy that cuts my hair when I'm in Philadelphia, he plays in a really cool band called Sunstroke. And it's like Dag Nasty type stuff. And he told me the best show he ever played, like one of the top 5, was in Johnson City 10 years ago, maybe more, maybe like 2010. And so apparently they used to have a bump in music scene, but for the most part, there don't seem to be new kids getting into punk here. And so the head chef at a place that I go to, because they have vegan stuff, is the guy who plays in the only D-beat band in this entire area. And I saw his band play to other people in their late 30s in pretty high amounts at a local club recently. That's about it. Dead Count played one show here on a tour, our first tour, a couple months ago, on our like a loop around a fest we were playing in Texas. And it was really cool. But I don't really think that there's like an active music scene here. There are just bands that play sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're a husband and wife team. How do you manage a marriage relationship and a working band?
I mean, Noelle's my best friend. I mean, it's easy to work with her. Her and I are both, God-fearing, Holy Spirit-led Christians. And so it's pretty easy when you have a good marriage, it's pretty easy to do pretty much anything with that. It's not always easy, but it's always simple, if that makes sense. I mean,
yeah, that's a good point.
I mean, it's, we know going in that we are gonna still be married first before we're bandmates. And I pretty much do everything anyway, so I don't mind to do that. It's the way my brain works. I don't really have an attention span, so it's like, I wrote this whole record myself, and with a lot of really actually imperative melody points that Neuro ended up putting on vocals and stuff like that. But so on the road, I really try to shoulder the responsibility burden. And being in a band for us until the last few months was sort of theoretical. I mean, we started 3 months before quarantine hit, and we played one show that was amazing, and it was a big deal. But and then being in a band was more of a theory than anything else. I mean, it was me basically like working with smaller labels to get the tapes out and to record at home. I played everything but drums on those, and they're all, of course, doing vocals, and getting an LP recorded in 2020, hoping it would come out like 6 months later, which was silly in retrospect. And so being a husband and wife, I mean, I don't know. I think it's pretty easy. She's my best friend, and we get along in real life, so we get along on the road too.
That says a lot. Makes a lot of sense. So I'm going to do my best to shift gears and go into narrative mode, like we're on an episode of Behind the Music on VH1.
Please.
The group.
I would
okay.
love to be on Behind the Music.
Here we go.
For now, this will definitely do.
The group found its beginnings at the tail end of 2019, hanging out in a West Philly apartment. Founding member Matthew Green had written a demo's worth of 77 style punk songs, seeking to combine the trademark hook-laden proto-punk sound of bands like Buzzcocks and the Undertones with the edge of modern hardcore. Green and drummer Brett Hurt had met earlier that year at a local gig while both of their bands at the time were touring steadily. After some concerted talk, Green and his wife Narelle took a week in the mountains to tighten up a handful of songs with Narelle on main vocals and Matthew on guitar. So please follow up and add to that.
Yeah. So I had like just parted ways with another very busy band I was doing. And it was like, I mean, honestly, like dealing with subcultural music and subcultural musicians. I mean, it's a music scene that boasts of having a high draw of people with issues. And which honestly, man, like I don't think anybody is outside of that realm. But it's particularly bad in punk and hardcore music. And so I would go as far as to say it was a falling out with this group of people. And you know, focusing on that energy. I mean, I was pretty close when I started Stud Count to just not playing music anymore. I was so over it. Which is not I knew what was gonna happen. I was just being a brat. So I put all this in, you know, my friends and I, we started this band, you know, I had written it, I taught them the songs. We then got our first show together and we played, we booked our own show, which you normally don't do in Philadelphia. We booked our own first show. We had gotten some cool sort of like remaining offers from other places I had done interviews with. We were on a pretty major radio station in Philadelphia, just doing an interview. And then come February 2020, we had gotten our demo out and we played this first show and it was amazing. I mean, we had people that were hardcore bands from the city that were bigger than us opening and then like a pretty substantial headliner like above us. I mean, like it's the kind of show that I would have wanted to play with the bands I was doing before after touring for years. And so, I mean, we packed out the place. We had a really great reaction. We played really well. And then, I don't know, we were just riding that high, ready to go. And then quarantine hit like 2 weeks later. And I don't know, I look back on it. And at the time, I really felt stunted by that. And I was like, but then, you know, it took a week and a half from the world shutting down for 2 weeks to become, is the world ever going to be the same again? And so my wife and I, we took to the mountains and we wrote more and we hung out and we just kind of focused on not dying because it kind of seemed like the world was apocalyptic. I mean, Manhattan itself was a ghost town for months, which is insane. If you've ever been to Manhattan in your
Wow,
life,
yeah.
you know that like even more than Philly being empty, Manhattan was dead and it was creepy to see. So
Really?
we
Not
went
even
to the
taxi cabs.
First of all,
Sorry.
that's its own story about the ethics of Uber and Lyft versus taxis, but that's a conversation for another time. Definitely no taxis though. But yeah, like so we were in the Poconos where Norel's parents live, and we were there for until further notice. We stayed 2.5 months, and then things started to be able to breathe. And you know, we selected our quarantine crew pretty well. Our drummer is from Queens, and so he's a pretty no BS guy. And you know, basically one thing led to another, and I don't know, something about the atmosphere of Philadelphia. People are pretty not keen on being told what to do for the most part. So I think I was more social in 2020 than I was the years before, even. And so we just kind of hung out, and we wrote some, we practiced some. I wrote 2 more LPs for other bands that I started in quarantine
Really?
during some of this time. Yeah, it's my brain. I have a real problem there. So, and we got another tape out. The label Convulse from Denver, which if you're at all into hardcore punk, Convulse Records is the spot to look. Put out the tapes, and we went and recorded an LP in October 2020, and then sat on that, and then once that was done being mixed and mastered, we were approached after shopping like very little. I think I sent it to 5 labels once it was done and mixed and mastered. And Smart Punk is the one that got one of the 2 that got back to us out of the 5 I sent it to. And you know, that was a label that seemed to be above our bracket, you know, and so we weren't going to turn our nose up on it. We had a couple weeks of negotiation and talking, and we inked it. And then quarantine officially ended. Philly Hardcore had its first show back in July 2021.
Cool.
And yeah, now we're a real band. You have to go play music, like we're a band or something.
Congratulations. That's a real ordeal and a real story. It's hard not to talk about because it was so frustrating to go through.
Oh yeah.
What do you think of Jesus Christ?
The Lord. Okay. I do want to clarify that Stud Count is not a Christian band, and that any and all views you hear on this program are implicative of my wife and I, and not the band as a whole. I believe that Jesus Christ is who he said he was, which is God. I believe him and the Father and the Holy Spirit share the divinity, and I believe that there are a number of implications for humanity because of that truth.
Indeed. A lot of depth there. So how do you navigate the punk rock world and your faith? What are the unique challenges this vocation brings, and what have you found that helps?
Well, here's the thing. There's been a lot of falling down and getting up. I was only born again at 20, and I was punk first. And prioritizationally, I am not punk first anymore. So I fronted a Christian hardcore punk band for my first 5 years in the faith. And to be quite frank with you, watching the absolute bloated corpse of Christcore die in the last half decade, it has been refreshing, revitalizing, and has presented some framework for me to be able to operate as a Holy Spirit filled fella in a music scene with some more problems than normal. And so, I mean, honestly, the things that challenges is not listening to other well-meaning Christians telling you things that are false. I mean, that was the biggest problem for me existing in Christcore, that basically, I don't know, like people got so focused on getting mad at Bible Belt conservative Christians and this, that, or the other thing that they completely lost sight of holiness, genuine holiness. I mean, what started as radical Christianity that wasn't bound by Americanisms almost immediately devolved into just heresy. And the state of the culture now being more important than the gospel, which was sort of the opposite of the point. And so for me, it's like the challenges is one, I mean, the spiritual is real, and it can be suffocating and challenging if you're not, even if you are prayed up, even if you are read up. The other is, and so that was challenging. For this era of my life as like a married, adult, mature Christian, it's not as difficult. The challenge can be working around a particularly volatile political environment and operating in such a way that that your views largely don't align with a lot of your friends. And things that are helpful is, I have good friendships with the people that I play music with. But about 2 years ago, I sat down with them and I said, "Hey guys, so, one by one, I said to each one of them, I said, listen, I wrote this stuff. When it comes time to contract for whoever signs us, I'm only going to put Narelle and I on the contract. It's not because I want to hold anything over you. It's just people, they come and they go. And I put too much into this to have it taken by, say, a disagreement." And all but our drummer were like, "Yeah, of course you wrote everything. Why not?" And our drummer, who is the man, we love Brett, was like very New York about it. But he was like, he was very skeptical. And he was like, "I mean, I'm not going anywhere, but yeah, all right, man, that's fine." Like you could tell. And the great irony is that everyone else has gone except for him. since then. It's only been 2 years. We've played 7 shows, since then. So,
Hmm.
like, I don't even have the same lineup for this upcoming tour in the fall that I did in May. Like, and so that's been helpful, having the sort of the planning and the sort of managerial aspect to be able to control that sort of thing without, like, because that's the thing, is that being a Christian in this music scene, you never know. You could just be minding your business, sneeze wrong in the wrong neighborhood, and next thing you know, you're getting smeared on the internet. And so that's, I guess that's really it, man. Is the negative aspects, I suppose. The challenges have been, you know, not only now tiptoeing around just the greater punk rock ethos, whatever that is, but also tiptoeing around former Christcore, which has actually just honestly, and I say this not to the individual, I love the individual, God loves the individual, but as a community has been a massive obstacle to work around. I mean, it's like, I swear you could literally be like, hey guys, I don't know if you knew this, but the Bible is true. And former Christcore would have a conniption. And so that's really it. But the benefits have been being able to sort of be in charge of these things, knowing that it's our own thing and that no one can take us out of it. Having conversations just like these with labels that want to work with us, being like, hey, I need to know that if somebody decides to call me problematic on the internet, we're not going to get dropped by the label, etc. And we've gotten agreement. So that's really it.
That's cool. It's refreshing to run into somebody that's like-minded and kind of has a similar view. I did a music magazine for 28 years, and around 2008, the U.S. economy, the marketing economy, the magazines, and the music industry all just went down the drain at the same time. And I kind of held on to print until the end of 2011, and since then, you've got radio stations, retail establishments like Christian bookstores, which was the retail chain besides the mainstream stuff like Hot Topic and whatnot. They're gone. Major festivals are gone. Music magazines like mine are gone. And so it's just interesting that what I thought was going to last forever and what was I was in the middle of is pretty much gone now. And you call it the bloated corpse of Christcore. That's
Sorry
no,
if that was offensive.
it's not offensive. It was refreshing to hear somebody else see the same thing and say this doesn't exist anymore, or it's dead, dying, barely hanging on, if anything.
And I think that's healthy, man. I think that, like, in the same way you just want to purge a lot of that stuff. I mean, it's healthy. I mean, we all go through it. So culturally, it's a little bit quicker of a turnaround, but in the whole world, I mean, there are issues. People are prone to having those. But like, Jesus not being the focus of Christian music is not only ironic, but extremely problematic and will lead to its either purging or full-blown demise. And so the only Christians left are serious. And I mean, this is going to sound hyper Calvinistic of me, but actually born again as well. And so doesn't mean we don't have issues. It doesn't mean that we haven't made mistakes. It doesn't mean that, there won't be times of, Proverbs says the righteous man falls 7 times and gets back up 7 times, doesn't mean we won't fall 7 times, but it does mean that the bloated corpse is dead. And I'm thankful because I played those Christian music festivals, it was disillusioning at best. To have gone to the last Cornerstone when I was freshly born again and been in this amazing environment, and then to watch, play the follow-up festivals and watch as more and more was allowed and less was stood up for. And I mean, the thing that had gotten me kicked out of the last Christian band I played in was a 101 message about spirit-filled hardcore clearly not operating in the Holy Spirit. It took 45 seconds to preach, and that was it. I was asked to make a public apology for it, which of course was not going to happen.
Wow.
And so I guess when I say that, I mean that with no bitterness, no resentment, just knowing that it's really hard to tell if there were really brothers around us at any time to begin with. And now, to be frank, operating as a lone Christian, my wife as well, so lone Christians in this, with more of a managerial position in groups.
Mm-hmm.
Feels easier to obey the Lord, and it's easier to honestly express myself. And I
Wow.
know that might sound a little carnal, but I think expressing myself in art is really important. Not everybody has the love language of being an accountant or something, you know.
Yeah.
It's
That's quite possibly why you were created. One of many reasons, probably, but
probably,
it's nice to operate in that.
yeah, man.
So I have a question that it's not the same as it was before this conversation, but ever hear of bands like Morellas Forest, Further Seems Forever, Halo Friendlies, The Juliana Theory, Unashamed, Focused?
I have heard of 4 out of 6 of those, and I've listened to 3 out of 6 of those. It's ironic for me because I grew up before I was born again, I was a pretty militant atheist. Um, and I'm from a Jewish background, and I don't know if you know a thing or two about New York Jews, but for the most part, we are secular. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, there's exceptions to that. It's a city of 10 million, but you get the idea. Um, and I said it was ironic that I was given an MXPX record by my cousin because, I mean, nobody in my family has been born again ever,
Mm.
like for generations and generations back. I mean, I don't think there have ever been even one Christian. Um, so I never really listened to the Juliana Theory very much, but I'm fully aware of that sort of like hardcore slash presscore adjacent emo world that was happening between '98 and 2002. I
Yep.
like Further Seems Forever. I mean, my heart breaks a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead on a limb and say that Chris Carrabba is one of the best songwriters of the last 30 years.
Good call.
Even though I was never really a dashboard guy because I came in through Oi and street punk 1st,
Mm-hmm.
so I never really got into dashboard until I was like 18 and decided to give it one listen. I was like, this is all right. I'm not going to come back to this, but I'll listen.
Yeah.
So I like some of that stuff a lot. Now, as a mature adult, at a certain point, when you're 13, you're too mad and convinced that for some reason that anarchy is going to work when you live in your mother's house. It's a very strange time for young punks. But and then I got a little sadder. Then I was angry, and I gave a lot of these bands a chance, and I was wrong about almost all of them. I mean, Taking Back Sunday was amazing, it turns out, and same with honestly some Dashboard and Further Seems Forever, and yeah, I guess I could go on, but you get the idea.
Yeah. So how do you find a good hook, and how do you dial in just the right guitar tone to make it pop? Really good job on Through My Window and Give Me Time. Again.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, man. So this is almost going to go back on everything I said about being punk from a young age, but I really believe that pop is at the heart of punk music. And I say this because I know a lot about it. I don't mean that with any arrogance. Being a young, isolated, not only was I a militant atheist growing up, but I was also like a basket case. Like, I mean, I was also like what most would have called, I would have lived it this way. If my family found out I was on work release from prison and working at a pharmacy part time or something like that, they would have considered it stable and successful. So when you're into this music to such a degree, but you have a hard time maintaining friendships because of that kind of lifestyle, you get into the lore. I mean, punk rock like really did something for me. Like that's the sort of gonna sound once more like very like almost carnal, but it's like music has done a lot for me in ways that like just honestly very little else has done. I mean, I connect with music on like a deep level across the board. And so surviving, there was one school that like I was in alternative programming and such like that. And I was in one school that was a good hour plus away, 2 hours round trip, and the government, I wasn't dangerous quite enough to have to stay there, but I was too dangerous to keep going to public school. So there was a government transportation vehicle that would take me from my home to the school and back. And so this was before iPhone. This was before I had internet on my phone. This is before I don't think even had a cell phone at the time. I did have a CD player.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had these Ramones records and I had these different things, and falling in love with the Ramones kind of first as far as like digging into lore and finding out like, I mean, everything about that band was them trying to be pop rock stars and being just a little bit too ugly and a little bit too street tough to do it. And so if you listen to the Ramones knowing this, their biggest two influences were the Beach Boys and the Beatles. And so when it comes to like, how do I find a good hook? I write pop music, man. That's what I do. Is I look to the people who wrote those ice cream corded songs in the 60s and 70s. And I also just, I don't know, after years and years of doing that, now I just hear the whole record in my head, and I have the frustration of trying to translate that with an acoustic guitar on my iPhone and then teaching it really poorly, pantomiming it to the drummer and then writing over it. So, I mean, that's really it. And I'll say this with all humility, like there are a lot of songs that I have that would be Ramon songs at best if it wasn't for Narelle's input on vocal melodies and hooks and such like that. She is a classically trained vocalist, and she draws so much influence from bands like the Sundays and the Cranberries that songs that would just be Blondie B-sides have become catchy or hooky or sugary pop songs.
Right on. Well, last question. What are your thoughts on heavy metal, the metal scene, and heavy music like that?
I mean, I'm around it a lot. I've been playing in hardcore and punk bands for a lot of my life. I mean, the first band I played in was 2004, 2005 is when it started, so I was 13, 14. I am not a metal guy. That's not for any particular reason. My ride or die best friend, sans my wife, is for the last decade of my life, he is a black metaler who has been a black metaler from the same age I got into punk. And he's from actually around this area where we ended up moving. And so I have been exposed to so much of the best of metal that I basically, it's the kind of thing I'm not going to turn off if my friend puts it on. But it's not something that I seek out. I just don't have the attention span for songs that are like 6+ minutes long. That's my only thing about heavy metal. I will say this: growing up in southwestern Connecticut in the early 2000s, I do like kind of metallic hardcore bands from that era for nostalgia reasons. Like I like Hatebreed still. Like, I mean, I was coming up in an era where Bury Your Dead was a popular band, and like, so there are some things that I am okay with. But as far as straight metal, I'm basically trusting the experts and kind of keeping my 2 cents out of the situation.
Yeah. Well, Matthew, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, man, of course. Thanks for having us.
You bet.
Well, hey, man, be in touch. Please don't be a stranger. You got my contact now.
All right,
where do you live at?
Austin, Texas.
Awesome, man. If we're ever in your area, let's grab coffee or something.
Sounds good.
All right, man. You have a good one. I appreciate the time.
You too. Send my best to the band members.
All right, I will.
All right. Take it easy, Matt.